Hi, welcome to CitySpace. My name is Amy McDonald. I'm the director of CitySpace. This is our last event in July, and thank goodness. And we are so happy to end July with Bill Littlefield, who's Bill and I worked together for years. He was telling a story earlier that Lisa emailed him, I won't say how many years ago, but Lisa emailed him for his first novel, and his daughter was sitting on his lap in the studio, and she was told to behave herself and be quiet during the entire interview, which was being taped. And at the very end, she couldn't help herself at 2 years old and grabbed Lisa's necklace and went, "Beads!" And so she had to edit that out. So
it was
Lisa,
the very end.
It was at the very end.
We're going to try to recreate that tonight, but she's a little bit now.
She's a journalist in her own right. So Lisa and Bill, Lisa is the ideal interlocutor for tonight's event. Is this your second novel? Third novel.
But who's counting?
Brookline Booksmith is in our lobby. You can sell the book. They're selling the book, and you can purchase a copy. Bill will be signing after this conversation. If you have questions, go to slido.com, the app, and if you type in the hashtag Mercy, you can type in your question for Bill. He's willing to take sports questions as well, but we're going to be interspersing it with questions about the novel. And look at WBUR.org/events to see what's coming up, particularly this fall. We have quite a packed fall for events in this room. Take it away, Lisa.
Thank you. And Bill Littlefield, nothing says retirement like a Hawaiian shirt.
Well, I've been waiting for an occasion to wear it.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
So maybe we should start off with retirement, and you can tell us a little bit about what you've been doing, because I know one of the things you've been doing, obviously, is this major project of the book, and another thing you've been doing ties in very closely to the book.
Actually, before I left WBUR, I explored opportunities to work with incarcerated individuals. And that was because many years ago, when I was teaching full-time at Curry, I had a colleague who worked with guys who were incarcerated. They were in Walpole at that point. And he was always after me hey, you got to have one of your courses be with the guys in Walpole. And I always found an excuse not to do it. And finally, after I got ready to retire, I thought, well, now I have no excuse, and I'm going to do this, because I think it's a good thing to do. And it has changed everything for me.
So I want to get into that a little bit more, and we will with the book, but how often do you go in and it's writing?
Yeah, I was going in once a week. I was the world's oldest teaching assistant. And I helped out with whatever course they happened to be taking. And the first semester that I worked with guys at MCI Concord, they were doing a public speaking course. And so they'd come into the study hall and they would practice their public speaking, and the other guys in the class and I would critique what they were doing, and we'd try and sharpen up the delivery. And that was when I learned that the sense of humor is still there. There was one wonderful guy who his topic was that the food in the institution was terrible, but that there were various ways that it could be improved and it wouldn't be that difficult. And the most important way was that they should have chocolate at the end of every meal. And so he made this dead serious speech about how that would change it. Like, my God, these guys were locked up 23 hours a day during COVID, and he could still do this. He could still create these strange, wonderful, funny situations. And at the end of his presentation, he walked around the semicircle where everybody was sitting and gave everybody a piece of chocolate. And he gave me 2 pieces of chocolate, like an apple for the teacher. And I said, Yang, where did you get the chocolate? And he said, you don't want to know. Not the sort of thing we're likely to talk about. So I worked with the same group of guys for 4 years, and they graduate in September, and they have a ceremony. I happened to be at Concord when the Tufts program had their ceremony.
Because they have the similar program.
Same idea. I think it's an associate's program rather than a bachelor's degree, but same idea. And I got to meet some of the relatives of some of the guys who were graduating. And you have never seen prouder family members in your life.
Because they were getting a bachelor's degree.
They were getting a degree.
And
some of them had to do the GED beforehand, but to become eligible to get into the program.
Mm-hmm.
But it was great. It was great. And I can't wait for graduation. It's going to be fantastic.
So tie in that experience to the book itself, because the book, now we've been promoting this, and many of you might have heard the on-air promos or the CitySpace promos, where it says, Bill won't be talking about sports, but he'll be talking about his new crime novel.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
It's a crime novel in the sense that some characters in the novel commit a crime, without a doubt. And one of the central characters is a guy who's been in prison most of his life, and he's released under a merciful release program, and so he's allowed to come home to die, basically, and he doesn't.
He doesn't die.
No, not right away, and that's kind of a key situation in the novel. And that came about because I have a friend, a classmate actually from college, who was a physician. And after he retired, he volunteered to be the doctor who would go in to when somebody'd say, hey, this guy's eligible for parole to just go home and die somewhere other than in the prison. And he would go examine them. And he was one of the guys who decided whether they were eligible. And I was having lunch with him one day, and he was talking about this, and I said, what would happen if somebody didn't cooperate?
Fulfill their obligation to die.
Yeah, their obligation, right? You're going home to die. And he said, I don't know, it's never happened. And I said, well, it'd be pretty interesting. I mean, would the probation officer come back and say, hey, he doesn't look so bad. Get the van, we're taking him back. It's absurd, of course, but incarceration is pretty absurd. The whole situation is that's one of the things you learn when you go in there for a while and work with guys. It's pretty nuts.
So we get little glimpses of that throughout the book, and I wonder if you can tell us about it. Has anybody yet read the book? We have it out. Ken has? Anybody else?
I don't really care if they've read it. The key is have they bought it.
That's right. Excellent.
There, that's good. Excellent.
Very
Perfect.
good.
All right.
So it's a really terrific book if you haven't bought or read it yet. But let's just set the scene right now. So this takes place, and as you can tell, if you look at the picture, it's a middle-class neighborhood, large houses, and I'm somewhat quoting here from Bill's book. I picked and chose certain pieces. The neighborhood, as you write, is comfortable. Large houses that welcome new owners after smaller houses have been knocked down. The owners had children who played soccer in the town league and basketball in the church league. Their teachers were pleasant young women who'd recently gotten their master's degrees in education. Eventually, the new owners would become the old owners and begin to wonder if they really needed so much house. There were a few curious characters in the neighborhood, but no one more curious than one particular neighbor, and this is the gentleman who wouldn't die, Arthur Balladino, who had been convicted of everything but, and I didn't know this word, which I was hoping was pronounced moppery, but
no, it's mopery.
Mopery, yeah, which is, I don't know, does anybody know what mopery is? Good. I'm not the only one. Committing a petty offense such as loitering.
Yeah, they used to convict people of it in Shakespeare's England.
Ah.
Mopery. I just love the word.
I'm so glad.
Yeah. There's another part of the novel where I horse around with a piece of, I have a memory that is only useful in terms of trivia and little things. Like I remember little, there's a part in the novel where these two guys are talking, and one of them has had the terrible experience of trying to cut down somebody who's hanged himself. And he says, it was like cutting down a sack of potatoes. And the other guy says, or rocks. And the first guy says, or potatoes. Which is a direct steal from Waiting for Godot. Like leaves, like ashes, like leaves, when the two characters are waiting. And I do that a lot. Then that's mopery.
Yes.
I mean, I remember coming across mopery when I was reading about Shakespeare's England, and I thought, what a great word.
So do you ever
What a
write that?
great thing to go to jail for. Mopery.
Exactly. And so do you have a little notebook where you say, use this sometime?
No, it's the kind of thing I remember. I don't remember important things, but I remember witless things that then, surface.
It was very entertaining. So how did the presence of Arthur Balladino, who only lived in that house for a short time because most of the time he was in prison, how did his presence and his wife's presence, especially in the house, shape the neighborhood and shape your story?
Well, different people have different feelings about it.
And we should say he's basically a mob boss.
Yeah, oh yeah. He was convicted of everything but mopery. He was a bad guy. But some people think, well, this is terrible. He's coming home and this is going to shoot real estate values to hell because this guy was a lifelong, criminal. And other people think, no, this is great. This is going to build interest in this community. And someday somebody's going to buy this house and they're going to say, you see those stairs? You go down those stairs and there's concrete down there. You get a drill down there. You're going to find all kinds of people down there. and that would, oh, yeah, okay. How much you want for this place?
50,000 more per person.
So nobody quite knows. The fun that I had with Arthur Balladino was his associates, two guys who work for him, both when he's in prison and not. He's still carrying on a lot of his operation when he's incarcerated. But there are two guys, Gibby and Francis, who work for him. And the great fun of the novel was writing the dialogue of Gibby and Francis. And somebody who got one review said, reminded him a little bit of the dialogue in a Dennis Lehane novel, and I thought, well, that's pretty good. That's not too shabby. The only thing better would be if they'd said it reminded him of a dialogue in a George V. Higgins novel, which was pretty much the top of the line. But yeah, that was all right.
And did those two characters, Gibby and Francis, who were basically doing some of the dirty work for Arthur, what of them was drawn from some of the inmates that you were working with?
Nothing of them, but both of them have been incarcerated on and off, and so they heard stories, and some of the stories I have borrowed from some of the stories I heard from guys who were incarcerated.
Tell us about some of them.
Have to be a little careful with that. There is a story about a guy who was convicted of first-degree murder who probably shouldn't have been, probably should have been convicted of something, but not first-degree murder. And his story was basically that two gangs happened to meet in the wrong place and there was a shootout, and it wasn't like premeditated, it was a bad thing, but his story was that the prosecutor had found somebody who would come in and cry in the courtroom, and that the jury had been very moved by that, and the person who came in and cried wasn't in fact involved with the situation at all. So, it was ugly.
There's another great story that appears here And you told me about also with one of the inmates with whom you worked, who became a legal expert.
Oh, yeah. That's another story. Again, not the character in the book, but one of them tells the story. The guy was incarcerated for a very long time and became exceptionally aware of sort of how the courts worked, and he would consult with guys who were going back into court for something to get something straightened out, and he would say, okay, first thing is you have somebody bring you a suit and a tie, because you don't want to go in there dressed like an incarcerated person. The second thing is, before you go before the judge, you say, could you please have them remove the manacles and the handcuffs, because I don't want to appear to be a danger. And they do it if you ask, but they don't do it if you don't ask.
So a lot of them go in.
But yeah, absolutely. A lot of them go in
Manacles,
prison
shackles.
garb, shackled, and there's a predisposition to say,
Right.
yeah, I don't think
guilty.
so.
Yeah.
So then the third thing was, this guy would help them with precedent. And he would say, all right, here's what you say to the judge. And memorize this. This is what you say. And this guy had gone in before a judge himself when he'd been accused of doing something by a correctional officer that he hadn't done. And he argued his own case before the judge. And he argued it so well that the correctional officer withdrew his charge, consulted with his attorney and said, forget it, they're going to find me out. Let's get out of here. And when this guy was finished, the judge said to him, did you go to law school? And he's thinking to himself, how the hell was I going to go to law school? I've been here for 30 years. He said, no, Your Honor, I did not go to law school. And when he told me this story, I said, you must have been flattered. And he said, no, I wasn't flattered. I was angry, because that judge was assuming that the only way I could have known what to do was if I'd gone to law school. And I didn't have to go to law school. All I had to do was read. And that was an interesting wrinkle on something that I'd never have encountered.
Well, did that happen a lot? Because there are really beautiful parts of the book where you talk about how nobody can truly understand somebody else's experience. Part of it has to do with the dying experience. And you say even people who are going through the same experience it differently.
Yeah, oh
And
yeah.
So what else was kind of on the learning curve for you?
Well, I just think that's true. I think it's true for really happy, joyful experiences, and also for horrible experiences. I mean, talk to any number of people who've been married. What was it like to be married? What was it like to stand up in front of your friends and make the commitment to another person? And some people are going to say, it was no big deal. I've been living with a girl for 13 years, and what big deal? It happened that for me, it was an enormous big deal. I was moved. I didn't think I was going to be, but I was standing in front of my family and my loved ones, and I said to Mary that I'm committing my life to her, and it was a gigantic, moving experience. But that's not true of everybody. And I think it's, people are all different. People have all different experiences. People have all different reactions, no matter what, whether it's a happy thing or a terrible thing. And there are moments in the book where people are able to connect, and they actually find each other, and they actually understand. One person understands and feels what the other person understands and feels. And those are the moments of connection, and those are the moments where mercy is apparent, because how do we get through the day? We have those moments, those times when we connect with other people and we don't feel alone. And that was the impetus of the book. That can I say something about those moments? So.
And those
long
moments,
answer to a short question.
Well, I mean, because mercy is the title of the book,
Yeah.
and is the underlying theme along with faith. So It strikes me that even when there's a connection between some of the characters in the book, it's not necessarily like, a romance novel or like something you'd see on TV. I mean, there's a certain amount of respecting the other person's opinion or not really knowing where they're going with an opinion, and you can eventually connect, but it's not necessarily, ta-da.
Yeah, I think that's true, although I think there is some romance in the novel. There's a cop, a police officer in the novel, who meets a woman and is absolutely charmed by her because she has a friend who's been arrested, and she comes into the police station because she wants to know how she can help the friend. And this, very experienced police officer is charmed by that. This woman who just wants to help, and he knows she can't help. He knows there's nothing she can do, but he's absolutely smitten. And then he realizes that part of the reason that he's smitten is because something about this woman reminds him of the girl who used to sit behind him in Latin class when he was 14 years old, and who one day, when he was wearing a shirt not very much like this one because it was had a button in the back, and his button was unbuttoned, and she buttoned it, and he knew who was sitting back there, and there she was fumbling with the button on the back of his shirt, and he looked around, and she said, "There, it's done," and he thought, my God. And every day he would unbutton his shirt before he came into Latin class, hoping that she would do it again. And on the days when she was absent, his button would stay unbuttoned all day long. But this woman that he meets reminds him of this girl that he knew, and he dreamt about her. And it's just this way that love works for him. And it works. It's romantic and silly, and I hope it's also reflective of some ways in which we never quite grow past what happens to us when we're much younger. So there's romance, and there's a nice relationship between two women toward the end of the novel.
We won't say who they are.
No.
Have to leave certain
They're
things.
both terrific.
That's right. So if you want to ask questions, we have a couple of audience questions as well. So those people who are listening on Zoom as well, if you'd like to ask some questions, please do. One of the questions we have from the audience right now, are there stories or characters you heard about from your work with inmates that inspired the writing of Mercy, which I think you've mentioned. Are there any that you didn't bring up?
To some extent. No, I mean, the characters in the novel are not based on people that I've met in working with Guys in Concord, but some of the stories that they told me in different forms made it into stories that the fictional characters tell.
Yeah. Another question, a crime novel, which it's not really a crime novel, but seems like a departure from your sports journalism, but is it?
Yes.
Thank you. There are some similarities.
Well, there's a little boy who's playing an imaginary baseball game at the very beginning of the novel, and at one point, a little later in the novel, he's tossing a ball up and hitting it, the way a kid does, and he hits a ball through Arthur Balladino's window after Balladino has come home, and he runs into his father's house and says he's going to kill me, indicating that he knows who's just moved back. Fortunately, his only encounter is with Arthur Balladino's wife, who's a very sweet woman.
Who's lovely.
Yeah.
And gives him
cookies.
on a blue
And
napkin.
apologizes for not having milk.
Right. There is another question. A real feeling of suburban life for the middle upper class, where you're trying to weave in social justice issues into the plot.
Yeah. I was trying to at least present some characters who had an inclination. There's a woman in the novel who is overwhelmed by the by the mail that she gets with kids who are starving and have distended bellies and teeth sticking out through their lips and all of the awful conditions that we're all asked to address and write a check to. And she has this fantasy that if she wrote a check to each organization on one day, a month, and then threw them all away for the next 30 days, then did it again for one day a month, that it might make a difference. But she's just overwhelmed by the need, and she's overwhelmed also by the fact that she's comfortable and she has enough. She and her husband have enough. And how do we address this circumstance that so many people have nothing, or too little? So yeah, that's a part of what's addressed.
In other ways, and I think this brings us back to mercy, how do you tell us more about why that became the underlying theme of the book and then the title?
I was writing multiple chapters in this at the same time, and I wasn't sure as I was writing it how it was all going to come together, or if it was all going to come together, because the beautiful thing about being retired is there's nobody calling you saying, is that damn thing almost finished? And so I was kind of casting around. And as I got sort of further into different parts of it, I recognized that what held it together, if anything held it together, was the function of mercy in the lives of the characters, that how some of them have terrible lives and some of them have nice lives, but what holds things together and enables them to carry on is those moments of connecting. There's a episode that I keep coming back to, and I started it in one chapter, and then it kept coming up in other chapters because the characters involved kept referring to it. And Gibby, one of the petty criminals, remembers this day when he was 16, 17 years old. And he goes down to the Jersey Shore with a bunch of other guys, and somebody's house is empty, and they're going to be able to use the house, and they drink a lot of malt liquor, which he's never had, and he drinks it like beer, and that's the very bad thing to do. And he ends up on the beach the next day, just sick and just wishing everybody would leave him alone so he could just die and never have to deal with anything again. And a young woman, 16, 17 years old, sees him and grabs his arm and pulls him into the ocean. And he falls into the sea, and the waves come over him, and he stands up, and he realizes that his headache is gone and his stomach is fine, and he feels wonderful. And he says, "Hey, how did you know to do that?" And she doesn't have any answer because she doesn't know how she knew to do that. She just did it. And that's a moment.
And he says, "Jesus Christ."
He says, "Jesus Christ." And my friend, who's a Methodist minister, read that, and he said, "Baptism." And I said, "Well, I don't know. Maybe I didn't mean it that way, but that might have been it." I don't know. Not intentionally, I guess, but.
So there are many instances of that where you say things could have gone different ways, but they went one way thanks to mercy shown.
Yeah. It's the same, the episode I talked about before where the woman who's, her name is Esther Vane, and she comes in to try to help her friend who's been arrested for involuntary manslaughter. The involuntary manslaughter is because she's in a restaurant. She's in a restaurant with her father and the father's girlfriend, and the father is a monster and has treated her monstrously all her life, and finally she can't stand it anymore, and she pulls a gun out of her purse and tries to shoot him. But she's not a very good shot, and the restaurant is all stone in the inside, and so the bullet bounces around the restaurant for a while until it kills somebody else. And so she she's in there for involuntary manslaughter. And there's nothing that Esther Vane can do for her friend, but the police officer is so moved by her attempt, and he wants to find, there must be something she can do, because I've got to call her and tell her that there's, because he says in his health, I'm far too much of a coward to call her with nothing to say. So I got to call her and say, well, yeah, there's something you could do, and then maybe we'll talk about something else, and then maybe we'll go out to dinner, and then it'll go from there. And they get together, and they decide they're going to, be together.
It's funny because
mercy.
That's mercy, right? And you're not a softie.
Sure, I am.
You have, well, yeah, in some ways, but you also have a really healthy, cynical side. And did you have to fight against that as you wrote these characters and the dialogue and kind of the back and forth to get to that point?
No, because I think that's in there too. I think that side is in there. I mean, Arthur Balladino is something of a celebrity.
As the mob guy.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, because he's made a career of being a mob guy, and he's not just a one-time guy. And so people come in to interview him, and sometimes he goes along with the idea of being interviewed, and he says, at one point he says, if they're interesting and they have interesting questions, yeah, it's nice. It's a nice break from sitting in my cell. But if they're not interesting, I tell them where to go, and I don't want to talk to him. I don't got to talk to him, he says.
Just like the guy with the chocolate who didn't feel like telling you where it came from.
Yeah, well, better than I not know.
That's right, for your own good. Another audience question. Working with incarcerated people seems to benefit from a belief in redemption. To what extent, if any, did that influence your writing in this book? Belief in redemption.
Redemption is really a big word. I believe that people, Kurt Vonnegut had a son named Mark Vonnegut. Some of you may know Mark Vonnegut became a pediatrician, and he's a really interesting character. And before he was a pediatrician, he was institutionalized with schizophrenia, and then eventually went to Harvard Medical School and became a pediatrician. And Kurt Vonnegut reported that one time he and his son Mark were having a conversation, the subject of which was, what does it all mean? This whole thing that we are in. And Mark Vonnegut's answer was, I think our purpose in life is to help each other get through this thing, whatever it is. And I thought that was pretty good. So I don't know if it's redemption, but I really do think we're here to help each other get through this thing, whatever it is. And that's what the people in the book, in their best moments, managed to do. They managed to help each other get through this thing. And so that's my definition of mercy, is that, selfish and awful as people can be, sometimes they transcend the selfishness and they help each other.
And there's a lot of talk among the characters, different characters at different parts of the book, about what happens when we die and after we die. What do you think happens? There's a father-son discussion.
Yeah, there's a father-son discussion, and there's a discussion at Arthur Balladino's memorial service where Gibby is most of the discussion is in his head. And Francis is really angry at the service because he recognizes very early that the organ music is on a loop, and it's driving him crazy. It keeps coming around to the beginning again. And Gibby, of course, doesn't notice that, and Gibby is mostly wondering if there'll be any music when he dies, or if anybody will talk about him or remember him. And so there's a lot of sense of that. And then there's he says, well, if you're famous, Shakespeare, and Francis is somewhat baffled that Gibby would know anything about Shakespeare, and Gibby says, well, yeah, to be or not to be, I mean, that guy's going to be around forever.
Another audience question, what was your writing process? Did you stick to a disciplined schedule? Was it harder than writing about sports? Let's take before the sports part, did you stick to a disciplined schedule?
Yeah, I tried to write every morning when I was working on this book, and sometimes it was for a couple hours, and sometimes it was for half an hour. I mean, it was depend on what was going on, and if something wasn't working in one chapter, I'd try another chapter and just move it along.
Because it's not chronological.
No,
so you could easily go back and forth.
And at the end, I had all these different pieces, and I had to try and figure out how to order it.
Right.
So-
So did you have kind of like a big
Yeah.
blotter that you put everything down on and
Yeah, they were always on
matched
the
them all
floor.
up? Seriously?
I knew this went first, and I was pretty sure this went last. I have to figure out what goes in, how this stuff goes in a minute.
Then it's like a game of Twister.
Yeah. So.
And was it more, the second part of that was about writing about sports, was it less restrictive or more restrictive? I mean, when you're doing journalism and sports, it's very creative, but it seems like it would be liberating to do a novel, but maybe almost to a fault because you have to make up your own structure.
Well, the extent to which it was liberating was that there was nobody looking over my shoulder, and there was nobody saying, "Hey, don't forget this. We only have 6 minutes and 14 seconds for that because of what else is in the show," And there was nobody who was going to say at the end, that doesn't work, or that doesn't work, or wouldn't it be better if you did this and that or the other thing. So you're doing something by yourself rather than by committee.
Right.
And there are advantages to both. A guy sitting in the front row who used to really help me a lot with when we were doing stuff by committee.
So in the dialogue itself, I wonder if that came easily or not. It's great dialogue. It flows so smoothly. Is that hard?
No, it's just
It's not like you have the sound bites that you.
No,
would have
there's
put
no
into a
sound bites.
journalistic
But if you listen, you hear things. You hear the way people talk.
Yeah.
And you hear the inflection, and then they get into your head and they keep talking, and yeah.
What was the hardest part?
I don't know. Maybe the hardest part is deciding that it's finished. And not thinking, well, maybe it could be a little bit better. Maybe there's something else I should do.
How'd you decide that? Give it to someone to read?
Probably what happened was I started working on something else and thought, yeah, this is probably done. So.
Question, would you describe yourself as a journalist or a novelist or both?
There's I just describe myself as a storyteller. I do the best I can to tell a story. That's all.
So
I don't think I was ever a journalist, really. I mean, the stuff we did with Only a Game and the commentaries that I did, it had a whole lot to do with journalism.
Well, the sports did.
Yeah, but they were.
Do you think you'll be doing another?
The journalists went to Fenway Park to ask Roger Clemens when he thought he'd be ready to pitch again. And I'd go over and see the huge crowd of people around Roger Clemens all trying to stick their microphones in, and I'd go over to the other side and find some old coach who was sitting down at the end of the Minnesota Twins bench and wanted to talk about, this crazy game that they were playing before the park opened, where they take fungo bats out in the outfield and play. They called it baseball bocce, where you take a ball and you hit it, and it bounce off several walls, and then the next guy would have to try and duplicate your shot. And I saw these guys, all coaches in their 60s out there doing this 3 hours before the game, and I asked the guy, "What are you doing?" He said, "Oh, it's baseball bocce." And I said, who came up with that? And he said, well, some old guy who was probably just as bored as I am. Well, how do I know? We've been doing it for years. That was my idea of a commentary. That was my idea of a baseball story. And Roger Clemens didn't ever want to talk to me anyway. So.
Do you miss that, by the way? Do you miss the sports stories? You don't call it reporting, but
no. There's a million stories. There's lots and lots and lots of places to find stories. And
well, where does sports lie in your interest level now?
During the soccer season, I check to see whether Barcelona is first or second because they got to make it to the Champions League the next time.
Your Sacramento's doing really well? Did you hear Sacramento's doing really well?
No.
The Sacramento team?
I did not hear that.
You have to listen to All Things Considered.
I did not. I don't pay very much attention. I did hear the story about how the Red Sox lost a game by 700 runs the other night. I thought, well, that was interesting. I didn't know you could do that.
Exactly.
I thought maybe there was a mercy rule.
Are there any other questions? I wonder if anybody, before I go on, I guess you don't have to go through Slido. What the heck? Okay, go ahead, Kim.
Bill, I'm tickled that you mentioned Waiting for Godot. I was reading your novel, and other than Lehane and Higgins, the writer that came in was Beckett.
Wow.
And is that because these characters inhabit a world that is absurd? And the second question is, what is the correct term for a person convicted of mockery?
Okay, so, that's right.
Like a mopist? I don't know. Yeah.
Yes, what's the correct term? I'm going to repeat this for the Zoom audience. What's the correct term for a person convicted of mopery?
I don't know. I just know mopery
Then you
was
can just
in
make
fact
it up.
something of which one could be convicted.
You
if
just
one
say
were
it and say it with
unfortunate
confidence.
enough.
And then,
Yeah.
and the first question had to do with Waiting for
do
Godot
they inhabit
and Beckett.
an absurd universe?
Punchy, semi-absurd dialogue, just fruit of a different worldview now.
Is the
I've not
dialogue
seen
the
this
fruit
in
of
your
a
novels.
different worldview?
I think that we all are operating in a universe that's pretty absurd. I mean, we think a lot of times we like to think that we have, that there's a certain amount of meaning in it and that we get it and we got it under control and we got this insurance policy and we got this in the retirement fund or whatever it might be. It's not true. It's all up for grabs and moment to moment, and especially for people who are unfortunate enough to have to really struggle. And for the most part, that is the case with people who are or have been incarcerated. The absurdity is, I'll give you one example. Two guys are incarcerated together and share a cell, a very small cell. And they live together for an extended period of time. And they get to be very close. They get to share a lot, and they get to be very, very close friends. And they're both convicted felons. And after they're both released, they're not supposed to associate with one another because neither of them can associate with a convicted felon. So they can't associate with the one person who probably knows them better than anybody in the world. Here's another one. I can't appear at a probation hearing, even though I worked with these guys for 4 years. If somebody's eligible for probation, now you would think that somebody who's worked with a guy for 4 years might say, hey, I worked with this guy for 4 years, and he's a hard worker, and he got a college degree while he was incarcerated, and this is something you might want to take into consideration when you're thinking about whether or not he should be paroled. But I can't do it because there's an assumption that I would be biased in his favor.
So let me ask you, would you
Would I what?
be biased?
Yes. But why wouldn't I be? Wouldn't you be biased in favor of somebody who you'd gotten to know a little bit and had huge respect for?
Well, that's the question. If you had huge respect for them, yes.
Yeah, I do. But anyway, that's the world.
Did you come out, when you would come out of your classes, this was at Concord?
Yeah.
Concord State Prison. Did you usually come out with kind of more of a lift in your step, or did you come out shaking your head because of the system that had strange rules like that?
Both. Definitely both.
Like how so?
I came out knowing that I was going to walk across the street to the parking lot, get in my car, put on some music that I really like listening to, drive home, have a nice dinner with my wife, chat with her, maybe watch something on TV that we both enjoy and go to bed together, and life was good. And they were going to go back after class to a very small cell, and life was not good. And maybe they were going to get out sometime, and maybe they weren't. And that was heartbreaking.
And the part that made you feel lighter and happier?
I never, ever have seen people as supportive of each other. You know, I taught for over 40 years, one place or another, prep school, kids in program for kids for elementary school, and many, many years as a college teacher. And I never saw in any of those places students as supportive of each other as these guys are.
And why do you think that is that they are?
Because they have a tremendous respect for each other, and they have a tremendous sense of camaraderie. And if somebody falls behind, they're going to help them. They're going to help them up.
We should say this is a small percentage of the population that's taking these classes.
Yeah. And the competition is amazing. When this is through the Emerson Prison Initiative, and when they first put the program together, they had 10 applicants for every spot. So the guys who made it into the program, they had to interview, they had to submit a writing sample, they had to go through all of these hoops to get in, and that probably has also something to do with why they're so tight. And
they understood very well, with all the respect that they had for you, and maybe this is a demonstration of it, that you didn't necessarily speak their language or understand what was going on, and so there were times that they would say, "Oh, we better tell Bill what this is." Yeah,
there was one guy in particular, they'd start talking about something, and he'd say, wait a minute, Bill isn't going to understand that. I've got to explain that to him. Yeah.
Poor guy.
Yeah.
Audience question, would you encourage others to volunteer to work with prisoners as you have, and what needs might they address, and how would you advise them to think about it?
Yeah, I would definitely encourage people to do it. And there's programs, Tufts does a program, Emerson does a program, BU used to do a program, Harvard does a program, all in different institutions.
You have to have been a teacher before?
No, because some of the people are just doing study halls, and then there's a group called the Partakers who go in and work with individual guys, and they help them get through kind of day-to-day stuff, and then when they're going to get paroled, they help them find a place to live and find a job and connect with the community and all the rest. So there's a lot of opportunities. You don't have to be, they don't have to be in teaching.
And will you keep doing this?
Yeah, I'm going to teach a course next semester in across the street from Concord. There's a minimum facility that they call the farm, and there's some guys over there who need one more course to finish their BA, and I'm going to teach a writing course over there. So
you answered my question. You're teaching at the maximum security prison.
No, it's a medium. Concord's a medium. Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting because the distinction is a little bit puzzling. I always thought maximum meant that they'd committed a really serious crime, and that's where they were in maximum, and medium was a little bit less serious, and minimum was jaywalking. But it's not true.
Some kind of mope.
There are a lot of guys in medium security who spent years in maximum security first, and then kind of earned the right to move to another institution. And those are mostly guys who were, I shouldn't say mostly, the guys I know their sentences are very long. So, but somebody has judged that they're not as likely to cause any kind of ruckus, so they don't need to be in a maximum facility.
So the razor wire is just for show.
No,
The
the
razor
razor wire
wires
and the
for show.
locked doors are not for show. And
Did you get patted down every time you came in?
depends on who's in the trap. The trap is the security place that you go through to get into the actual prison. And it depends. It's very interesting. If the correctional officer in there is a real stickler for rules, yeah, you get patted down, you empty your pockets, you take off your shoes. There's one guy in there who's really a stickler, and I have to take off my glasses and show him my glasses. I don't know why.
In case
I don't know.
it's like Maxwell Smart, like there's something.
I don't know.
hidden
I
in
don't
there.
know. I don't know what they expect to find in my glasses, but anyway. And then there's other guys who take a quick look, oh yeah, you were in here last week, and then they do a little bit, but it's not a full, pat down. It's more than the airport, but it's depends on who's in there.
Is there another novel in your future, and what new projects are on the horizon?
No, I've been writing short stories lately, rather than a novel. There's another one that I wrote before this, called Jack Miller's Tale, which is based on, that one is set in sports. And if there's anybody out here who's an agent or a publisher, I'd be happy to talk to you after the event. But I'm not sure I'm going to write another novel.
Why?
It's hard. It's hard. It's very hard to keep something going for 300 pages.
Is there somebody you're reading now who you would recommend?
Yeah, for sure. I don't know how I missed Poisonwood Bible, but boy, is that a great book. I don't know how, it came out a long time ago, and I don't know how I missed it, but if you haven't read it, wow, it's really something.
Just one other question from me, and if there are any, I'll save that audience question for a second. If you had, okay, so when I interviewed you, however many years ago, and Amy reached for my beads,
Right.
if you were writing a book similar to this may be an unfair question, but I wonder how the decades and even retirement has changed your approach, changed your mindset about writing, and changed the themes, because there's a lot about life and death in here, and faith, and
Yeah, I think that you've answered the question. I think that when I wrote Prospect, which was the book you and I talked about years ago, the genesis of Prospect was I knew this guy who was a baseball scout and who had played for the Cubs back in the 40s. And I really liked him, and I loved his stories. So I decided that if I wrote a novel and initially the narrator of the novel was going to be a baseball scout, and I thought, this is great because there's so many great baseball stories that anytime I get stuck, I'll just have him tell another baseball story, and I'll move it along to some. So that was kind of the way that novel started. And he was an old man, and he was involved with his friend or his partner was an old woman, but the stories were mostly set in the world of baseball, a lot of them. And one of the main characters was the prospect, the kid who people would see as, wow, maybe this guy could make it to the major leagues. And you're right, the older I got, and certainly by the time I was writing this book, I was not thinking about somebody making it to the major leagues. I was thinking about people checking out. I was thinking, but what do they do at the end of their lives? Does anybody remember them? Does anybody, Arthur Balladino comes home to die, and he looms over the whole novel in some ways. And a lot of the characters are very close to the edge in terms of anything could happen. Gibby tells a story about how he's supposed to do this job for a higher up in the mob, and he blows it. He botches the job, and he knows he's botched the job, and then it's just a question of wondering what they're going to do to him. And that's kind of, that wasn't present in Prospect.
Or in you. Or in you.
In me?
Yeah.
Well,
sentiment.
yeah, exactly.
When will Tom Brady retire? This is from the audience.
I don't know. I wrote a piece, I think it was the last sports piece I did for Cognoscenti, when Brady announced that he was going to come back. And I can't remember all of this piece, but I remember one thing I said was that I just hoped that he was as healthy as he seemed to be, and that business about his wife coming out and saying he'd had some concussions and he wasn't quite as healthy as everybody thought, and then the NFL shut her up so that that wouldn't get out. I just really hope that he manages to have a full and conscious life, because that's, boy, oh boy, the one thing we learned from the folks just down the street here, it's a lucky pro football player who doesn't come out of the experience with some fairly severe brain damage.
Yes, Bill's talking about the neurological researchers who do a fantastic job.
Yeah,
And
they were at the center of it
Yeah.
here.
yeah, they're amazing. You're going to be on Here and Now,
Yes.
the noontime show. Do you know when that's going to air?
They told me it was going to be Monday.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
It's going to be Monday, and then I'm going to be having you on All Things Considered.
I'm delighted to hear
And
it.
then I am delighted to be hosting you again.
What fun.
It's my pleasure. Bill Littlefield, thank you so much.
Thank you. What fun,
Wonderful.
Lisa.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
And you're going to be signing books out front?
Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
excellent. So we'll see you out there. Thank you all for coming.
Where do I go?
Amy?
Okay. Thank you all for being here.